Okay, I think we're live. Hello, everybody. My name is Zach Goodman. I am CEO of TSP and Switched On Space. We are investors, managers, and also prop tech evangelists. And today we've got Alejandra from Room.com and we've got Nellie from Density. I'll introduce those guys in a second. This webinar is all about how do we make flexible space work. And the guys have kindly asked me to come in and moderate this conversation. I sit in the interesting position of being a landlord, of being a property manager, of being a prop tech advisor. And with both Room and Density, we've had incredible success partnering them using their technology across parts of our 2 million square foot portfolio. So without further ado, Alejandra is the lead interior designer at Room.com. Room.com, as you all probably know, make modular furniture for workplaces, and it is incredible stuff. Nellie is the first workplace innovation lead at Density, formerly being at Stripe, helping them blitz scale their operations across 10 offices around the world, I think it was. And she is now at Density helping her clients there make sense of the data that they yield from having the amazing Density sensors. I'm going to hand over to Alejandra and Nellie just to give us a little bit more background on themselves, their role, and obviously their amazing companies.
Thank you,
Alejandra,
Zach.
we'll go to you.
Thank you, Zach. Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for being here. Yes, as Zach was saying, I'm an interior designer by trade, but I've actually been with Room from the beginning as head of design, creating our suite of modular products. And today I'm also leading our own in-house studio, which is our own design studio for flexible workspaces. So we're actually helping our clients with a strategy to return back to work, but return to a better way of working. And how do we do that? We do it with modular architecture and trying to remain as flexible as possible.
And as for me, so before joining Density, I had been in the workplace world for about 10 years. And I was very much inside the clients, like in the client's shoes. I was designing and building offices, building our real estate strategy, building workplace. I had the opportunity to work with Density when I was still at Stripe, playing out with the technology. And for me, it was eye-opening to see that we were going from observational studies, having people walk the room at random time, and then thinking like, oh, we have the truth of how people behave, and then how technology could give us more relevant, more accurate data, and being in a seamless way. And so I was very glad that Density brought me in, and my unofficial title is like Chief Evangelist, because I educate the team internally, I educate the clients, and I educate the world. So I'm the spokesperson to external events. I'm happy to be here.
Great. So we're going to dive into the main elements of what this webinar is about. And we'll start off with a question, which is, what does a flexible workplace look like? If there's one thing that we know from the massive amount of literature, articles, opinion pieces, social media, it's this. Employees don't just want to turn up to work 9 till 5 anymore. Their lives have changed, their companies have changed, the desires of people in general have changed. And so the question is, they want flexibility. How can we cater for it? How is it already seeping in to the workplace? You know, what does a flexible workplace even mean anymore?
Yeah.
Well, you start, Nellie. Go ahead.
I think I just like to kind of go down memory lane and remember what flexibility was before the pandemic. And I think we were asking employees to be flexible, whereas we were not. Like we were asking them to be okay with our moves because some teams were growing, some teams were not. So every 3 or 4 months, we had to reconfigure how teams were located in the office. We asked them to move offices when we were growing or shrinking. So we asked them to be flexible, whereas our furniture was stuck for as long as we were in the same place. I think there's a shift now. Like we need to understand how we become flexible and allow them to find some stability because they've been through a tremendous change over the last 2 years and they've learned to adapt. And so it's for me, it's just normal that we get to align our spaces with the adaptability that they've shown during the pandemic. And so a flexible workplace, it means that it's on the tenant, the property to always look at the data and understand how people behave and how they can turn around spaces for the best value of employees.
So that's a really interesting point, isn't it? You've got effectively the employer being the person that dictates the environment without necessarily responding to the needs. So Alejandra, from a design perspective, how do you, as the landlord or the employer, design something that is more sympathetic? Are people actually succeeding in doing this and actually really taking needs into account first?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I love what you were saying, Nellie, too, because I think flexibility, it's all about giving people back the choice to choose, the ability to choose where they want to work and how they work. So when we're thinking about adapting our spaces, we need to think about providing a ton of different variety of environments so that people can find what they need. Usually before the pandemic, we used to have these very stale offices with maybe 2 or 3 environments where you had desks, meeting spaces, and maybe one lounge area. But now people are used to working from so many different places, and the workplace is not just one place anymore. The workplace is this, network of forums where people are working from. So it's not just your office, it's also your home, it's also your third workplace. So when people do want to come into the office, we need to make sure that when they come in with a laptop, they have all of these alternative places to sit from and find the conditions they need. So I think it's about trying to find a balance in the space, and then of course learning how they're using the space, listening to what's working, what's not, and then be able to change. And that's why it's super important to make those layouts as flexible as possible, because that way you can switch them around and just fit the current needs of your people and your company.
I think I want to add to this because it's so beautiful, Alejandra. What we've noticed during the last 2 years is that people have changed titles. Almost every 6 months, there was a new title, and people became more creative, and people start learning that they need to focus, they need to do this, or in order to find some distraction, they need that. And so now we need to incorporate into our offices. So I think our offices went from, as you say, maybe 3 different environments, or 4 or 5 for the most amazing offices, one maybe a nap room or a nature room, to we need a podcast studio, we need a photo studio, we need a place where people can run, we need a place for people to be inspired, to maybe bringing art. So people became a lot more creative and a lot more aware of what they need throughout the day to do the task. And it's really amazing to see that we're going to go from 3, 4, 5 to maybe 10 different environments throughout a network, because the goal is not to build a mega campus, but it's to do that throughout a network of places. I love it.
So this creates some unique challenges, because there needs to be balance between needs and resources, right? So fantastic if there's 5, 6, 7 different types of tasks that might be going on, but obviously the office cannot be Disneyland. We cannot create a new adventure ride for every single experience and new thing that comes around. So I guess I've got a question for both of you. Through design and through the use of technology, how do we find sort of the edges of the envelope, the balance between responding to people's needs, having enough variation of resource within space, but not going to the point where it becomes unmanageable for workplace designers and managers to actually cater to things? How can we, is the flexible workplace of today us responding purely to needs, or is it us actually, as say landlords or employers, guiding people into new working practices with design, with technology? Which comes first here? Nellie, do you want to shoot first?
Sure, happy to. So as you say, it's a unique challenge. And 2 days ago, I was hosting a roundtable with top leaders on the East Coast, and they were all sharing that complexity. How do I justify building all the spaces to my CFO, even to my COO, where I was I still don't know if people will come and use it. And so one of the best examples I've heard was that really compiling surveys with actual data. So a lot of people say, oh yeah, I would love to use a podcast recording studio. how many will use it, and how much do we believe that it will bring some return to investment. So now it's not just about utilization, and that was one of the big takeaways. Like, the heads of workplaces and real estate cannot just be accountable for the number of people who come, but like, do we have the space to accommodate what we believe will bring return to investment to the business? So having a big space for a big offsite seems to be really important, because they've seen a spike of engagement after a big offsite or a company all hands, and so they need that space, and renting one won't make it. So then you can justify having a big space, even if on regular days it's not so full. And if it's not so full on regular days, this is where modular furniture can come in, because you can create intimacy within a big room by reconfiguring furniture. So they were really coupling all those different elements to make do of the one same space with different configuration. But yeah, utilization is kind of like their banner and also their curse, because it's not enough for them to just look at utilization. They also need to show what type of activities or events are bringing us the most return of investment for the business. Alejandra.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's also about like rethinking the purpose of the office, right? Like the office is not, like you said, it's not a playground, it's not Disneyland. And we do have all these other networks that we can tap into for other needs, right? So it's about identifying what works for your company, what your people need. And then also understanding that when people want to come into the office, it's mostly for connecting. That's true. We want to see each other face to face. We want to be communicating, collaborating. We want to be in person. So that is one of the main purposes why offices will remain in place, because the human connection is super important. So I think the focus for the office has to change a little bit. And it's not about providing a ton of variety and just making it, like you said, like amenity spaces, but it is more about providing a space that will be great for community, for human connection, for team building, for culture, for offsites. And then you can use all of these modular components to make that space work in a day-to-day basis.
I think the best thing that I've heard from one of the leader was that it's not the death of the office, it's the death of the desk.
Yeah, I like that.
Because people are coming for collaboration and not for individual focus work.
Exactly.
And these desks take up a huge proportion of our floor spaces globally. I mean, it's really interesting the point you're making here, because to distill it down, actually what we're saying is the office space now needs to become something that it never has been, which is transformable. You know, the typical offices that we go into, we put up walls, we put up glass partitions, and we may have open plans and all the rest of it, but it's, you can move desks around the room and all the rest of it, but you really can't transform what the space is. And when you guys talk about sort of creating different environments sort of out of the same space, it actually takes me back down memory lane, because it makes me think of the school sports hall, where it could be a tennis court, it could be a basketball court, it could be for a school assembly where the bleachers come out, you know, and bringing that type of transformability into the workplace. Well, it makes a huge amount of sense. But I think it still comes back to the question of, when you're designing this and you're advising the CEO or you're advising the CFO or the facilities teams and what have you, is how do you know what to put in there? How are you working out how many one-man meeting rooms you might need versus four-man meeting rooms? And how are you guys using your technology, your experience, your product to help people make those decisions?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it has to start with a strategy. You know, this is not just starting from nowhere. You have to start with a good strategy. And that strategy means interviewing the people that are going to be working in the office, the leaders, understanding what's working for them now, what are their needs today, and then adapting the space to fit their needs today. But like you said before, it is really important to consider that that office can evolve over time, that you can transform that space just to fit their needs. And the way you do that is by keep gathering data, understanding how it's being used, by using sensors, technology, but also a ton of surveys, a lot of communication, and just understanding what's happening and what's working. So, and
just picking you up on that, in terms of every organization perhaps having their strategy and what have you, talk to me just a little bit about what commonalities are you seeing as you speak from one business to another? Because what I've found over the years, I've been in offices now for 15 years, and through that period of time, we saw a lot of people go through what I would call the Google slide phase, right? Which is everybody was going and saying, we want to make our office the most fun place ever. And a lot of bean bags were purchased, and the odd person took the plunge and put a slide in. But there were general themes that kind of homogenized themselves across the workplace. So when you guys are discussing strategy right now, like, tell me and tell everyone here, what are the common things that you're seeing? What is coming up time and time again?
Well, you want to go, Nellie, go.
Yeah,
Go after.
I love that question, because very much like I was giving a kind of like a history class on the workplaces, and we see that there was bucket of like 10 years. So usually we say it's like the 10 years of the cubicles, but that was the 10 years of like ultimate privacy. And then we went into we removed the cubicles, and it was the 10 years of information, went into the information to flow. And then we went to the 10 years of the Google, as you say, it was like, it needed to be fun. I think we closed that chapter. People are not coming to have fun. Like we've seen, happy hours are not bringing people back. Now, I think we're going into that new trend of like intentionality. And that's what we hear from every single company and top leader. We need to invite people with intention and with purpose, and it has to come with meaning. And that's really the three keywords that we hear from every company. And so the way they design offices and how they invite people to different event, activity, or how to use the office needs to come with purpose, meaning, and intention. And I think that's wonderful that we're jumping on that new wagon. And again, it's aligned with the new generation that is going to enter the office. So now the office will have to cater to 5 different generations. Some people who have always been in the office and non the cubicle, and some people who have never been in an office and they're just coming out of like the university seat or bench. And the new generation and the millennials who are going to take more than 50% of the entire workforce in the coming years, they want transparency. And they want transparency in the meaning, they want transparency in the intention. Why are you asking me to come? What am I expected to do? How can I show up to be my best? The idea is not transactions, like, tell me, how can I show up to be my best? If I'm there for a mentorship event, great, I know how to be my best, I know how to sell myself. If I come to really socialize, great, I know how to bring my most creative and eccentric self. So this is what we see, and that's definitely infusing and influencing the design of offices. So it's influencing the location. Companies are not dictating where employees should be located now. They need to follow where people have moved to, because there's been so much migration over the last 2 years. And inside the office, it needs to be authentic to where it is placed. So people don't want to enter a Google, a Facebook office in Paris and feel like it's the same as in Silicon Valley. They want authenticity. And that's the trend that we see a lot from our part.
So intentionality, people are coming to the office with a set of tasks in mind. And it's almost like they're approaching their days in a completely modular fashion now. So I'm going to be in the office. I'm going to make some calls where I'm going to need some private space to go and do that, because now I've been working from home. I no longer want to make phone calls out in the open in front of everybody. Then I want to get together with my team, and we want to sit somewhere informal because we're just going to have a chat about some longer term goals that we have. And then actually I'm probably going to take an hour, hit my laptop, go and sit at the desk, use that old fashioned thing for an hour, and then perhaps, on to the next thing. So, I mean, it's a fascinating insight.
Yeah, along this line, one of the leaders also that was at the group shared something very interesting. Like he said, the leadership team, they keep stating that people should come, so they benefit from the chit chat happening in the office, and they benefit from just overhearing some other. And so the head of workplace challenged them and said, but will you make yourself available? And they say, what do you mean? They mean like, will you be available in the office for them to come ask questions, overhear what you're saying, or are you going to like lock yourself in a room because you have Zoom calls the entire day? So that's intentionality. If you want people to benefit from your knowledge, you need to make yourself available and probably cancel all your calls when you come to the office.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so Alejandra, like from an interior designer's perspective, this is a pretty radical and chaotic change we put a couple of meeting rooms here, we have a kitchen there, we'll throw a sofa in the corner, and then we'll put rows and rows of bench desks in. So, I mean, in terms of this, like, when you're designing and what have you, are you thinking about sort of the different job roles that are coming into the business, or are you trying to kind of be utilitarian with where you're providing things? How do you overcome these design challenges?
Well, I think, like I said before, it is about intentionality and purpose, and it is switching, right? So right now, the focus and what I keep hearing from our clients is like, we want our office to be a center for gathering, for togetherness. So to do that, you need space. So you need to let go of a lot of tables and desks because they're not working. People are not going every day. It's space that is not being utilized the right way. So that way you can optimize a little bit of space and start using those areas for common areas. And I also think that there's like a switch in space where instead of using the enclosed rooms for meetings, it's actually happening that it happened more in the open and more casual. So you have like open spaces with modular walls, with, materials for brainstorming, so everything happens more out in the open. And I think what's switching now is that for the privacy, it's what's happening is that when you do have to jump on a call or in a virtual meeting, that's when you go into the enclosed spaces. So we're actually switching how we use space, which is pretty interesting too.
Okay. I'm going to interrupt this. We've got a great question from Ambrose, who's watching. There's been a lot of talk around surveying companies and their executives to formulate good office strategy. Could you go a little bit more in depth and share what that process actually looks like? What questions are you asking? How are you guiding that conversation? I think that's a brilliant question, because if there's one thing that we've become accustomed to doing over the last 2 years since the pandemic, it's surveying, it's asking questions, it's leading people into things. And I think the way you structure those questions now means more. And I think you were talking about having different generations in the workplace. People, you can ask one question to 3 different generations and you will get 3 very, very different perceptions of what you're actually asking. So Alejandra, I'll start with you. What kind of questions are you asking, and how are you enabling your clients to have that conversation with their teams?
For sure. So it's about like, well, it all starts with a survey, which is very generic. It's like, what do people really want? So we want to understand, what are the teams that are working in the office? What do they need? Do they need to be working together? Do they want to meet in the office? Do they need a special space? Do they need equipment? It's just like very technical to understand how they work together, and then how that works with the company strategy. But most of all, it's understanding what level of flexibility they want, because flexibility is number 1 request right now from everyone. And it's not just flexibility in terms of coming into the office or not, it's also flexibility in terms of when do we work. So we're also understanding a lot that there's like a change in how people want to work. There has been strategies of people doing like collaborative hours during the day, which is the hours that you can actually work together, and the rest is for free work so that you can manage your time. And that way also, it doesn't mean that you have to be in the office from a 9 to 5, and nobody's expecting you to be in an office from a 9 to 5. So I think it is just about having a basic strategy in the beginning, understanding the basics of your company and your people, just knowing what they need to do, how they work together, and what are the tools that we as a company we need to provide. And in terms of space, what are the spaces we need to provide? And then understand that all of that is going to remain in a permanent state of beta, because we're going to keep learning and keep changing. And we all need to embrace that change mindset. We all need to be ready to morph those spaces, to also understand that these things are not set in stone, and we can change our spaces to fit our needs.
And Nellie, throwing this over to you, when we're asking these questions, because my gut instinct is, from speaking to other business leaders, certainly more in the UK, when you're asking these questions to them about how they want to run their workplace, typically, if you are speaking to the C-level, the C-suite executives, they are invariably saying, I want my guys in. I want to create that culture. I want to get that electricity going. I want to get that vibe going, and all the rest of it. How do we ask them questions that they may find uncomfortable to answer, which is, you referred to it before, like, okay, well, if you are going to bring all of these guys in, how are you intending on interacting with them? And how do you drive C-suite executives down that road to actually make change in their organizations?
Zach, you spot on, and I think you read my mind, because this is exactly where I was gonna go. Like at another event I was last week, where we were about like close to 100. The one common thread that came from everyone was that there's a big divide between leadership and the employees. And we've seen that also in surveys and reports from McKinsey, for instance, where they show there's a big disconnect, like the C-suite wants something and they don't understand that employees are not on board and vice versa. The stereotype is like, yes, C-suite want people back in the office and employees feel like, no, I've shown you I can do my work at home. Why are you asking me to come to the office? So there's a strong divide. And this is why this question about serving is really key, is like, we have to be more intentional and how to survey, and we have to like show data to C-suite, and we have to show the C-suite data to the employees. And so one of the best way to do it that I've seen was in the book written by Brian Elliott and his colleague from the Future Forum, which was a consortium backed by Slack. And the book they published is called How the Future Works. And they basically walk through how different companies have done it, from like sitting down with the leadership, coming down with principles and not policy, but principle. What are our principles? What are our values? What were the ones that are outdated and what are the new ones we need to adapt to be aligned with the changes? And from that, understanding like how wide is the gap between our principles, our vision, and what employees are actually living on the day-to-day. And then the goal of the top leaders there will be to like reduce that gap. And unfortunately, what we know is that within that gap, the people who are suffering the most are the middle managers. They are the ones that are burning out. And why are they burning out? Is because of that divide. The leadership might say, everybody needs to come 3 days to the office, but then managers see their team working well remotely, and they don't want to break that dynamic. Or the leadership will be like, you know what, everybody does whatever they want to do. And then you have so much inequality between teams, because yeah, a manager will be like, oh no, I want to see you in person to come. And the other team will be like, great, I've learned how to use the tool to work asynchronously so you can stay at home. And then you have this inequality between employees that don't really understand, like, what do they even work for the same company when the team next door is not having the same model. And so that divide is very much where we need to focus. And so the goal of surveys, of actual data, is to reduce that gap. So first understanding how wide it is, and then reducing it is the process.
Brilliant answer. I want to move this discussion on to some really interesting touch points as well that certainly I'm being faced with a lot of the time. And one phrase that I'm hearing from a lot of leadership, and not just leadership actually, all through the ranks of organization, is what I would call the critical mass conundrum, which is we're working in a more flexible world. We're seeing many more organizations sort of, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday seems to be the dates that when we look at the statistics on office occupancy, we're seeing those days full. Mondays and Fridays are suffering. And I think one of the issues that we're seeing across the board is it can be quite demotivating or demoralizing to be in these workplaces on those Mondays and Fridays, because they don't have the critical mass, the hum, the buzz, and what have you. And I think there's two questions that I want to embed into, and I think both of them play into your guys' expertise. How can we use the data better to inform the design to make these spaces feel more inhabited or more intimate on the days where we have less people in? Because we kind of know on the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays of a flexible place, it's almost chaotic because everybody's coming in, right? And we've got less desks in place and there's a real hubbub. But how do we work on the two, on the Mondays and the Fridays? And should we be led by the data and just say, well, you know what, less people use it, so it is what it is? Or should we be leading with design here and really trying to make these spaces work better for variable occupation? So I'd like to focus on the 2 days of the week that we're seeing across the world right now when they aren't busy. Because I think for leadership, if they felt that the place felt more excitable and more intimate on those days, they'd probably come to terms with people working from home more often, more easily.
That's an excellent question, Zach. I think, what we've seen in my office, it's happening too, the 3 days a week that is full is the midweek, but then obviously Mondays and Fridays are empty. But I've also heard from people who love to come on Mondays or Fridays because they don't like to have that many people around. So it also depends on personalities, right? But I think you have a really good point here. And I think it also ties into what Nellie was saying about, having a strategy, but also being completely transparent about it with everyone. So as a leader, you are going to be like, this is the strategy we're doing as a company. We're going to try to get everybody in, during the week. And maybe what you can do is strategize in when teams come in. And you can, that would be with a strategy where you decide that some teams might be better coming in on Mondays and on Fridays. So you get a little bit more fluctuation of people those days. But if you don't want to do it and you don't want to like structure specific days for people to come in, then what you can do is you can create spaces that feel more intimate by using modular components like modular walls, for example, things that would make spaces smaller than they really are. So even if you have a really big town hall or a really big lobby, then you can kind of adapt. And that is a flexibility on an hour-to-hour basis. It's just that the fact that people can morph the space to fit their current needs, that's super important. And there's a lot of ways to do that. There's a lot of furniture that is on wheels that you can now, implement. There is, like I said, I think walls is a great idea. It's just using things that can convert that space to make it feel a little bit more intimate and just fit your needs that day. Because I do agree with you that when you come into an office that has like 2 people and feels super empty, it's not very inspirational. It's obviously not very motivational either. So there are ways to do that. And one of those ways is just by really changing that strategy for the common areas and just making it. Another way is also breaking it in smaller groups. Even if you have like a very big town hall or a very big lobby, you can have different sets of sofas that are smaller for less people, so that you can, even if you come in smaller groups, you can have, a more intimate setup within that big space. So there's many ways to use design for that as well.
And again, I find this so fascinating, because really what we're actually saying is there's going to be different moods or different vibes for different ways, for different days of the week, right? And we have this with seasonality in our homes, right? In the winter, we like to draw our curtains, we like to get the fire on, we like to turn the thermostat up. And actually, I think what I can hear from you is there just needs to be more consciousness from workplace designers about really setting up these offices to work for that mood. So if a Monday is going to be a more intimate day, then I guess on a Friday evening or a Sunday night, someone's got to be coming in and setting these places up so it doesn't feel downbeat. Because I genuinely think that a lot of the designs of the current offices that people are occupying is what is probably troubling a lot of leadership, which is they're walking out of their glass box into the wide open plan and seeing, 4 people there, and they probably feel in their minds that their business is failing and what have you. Nellie, in addressing that issue, what does it like? How is Density working with clients to use like data from census to really convince people to make these changes? And what is the data actually showing about these days of the week?
So I just shared an article from Fast Company, and that's something I wrote a year ago, but I was playing around that idea, like what do we do of our Mondays? So first, the data has always almost been consistent. Like before the pandemic, Mondays and Friday were the days that were less busy than other days. It's just like that trend just become even more intense. So like Monday and Friday now are like almost empty. But the truth is that what we're starting to see is that first there's this 4-day work week, which is now really asking like, okay, what is the day that we should drop almost? But the question behind it is like, this 5-day work week, 2-day weekend has been imposed. None of us were born thinking like, yeah, of course my weekend is on Sunday and Saturday and Sunday. And so what we're seeing is that people are starting to question, how do we use the 7 days? And so something that I've seen is that Fridays, even before we realized that people were not coming to the office, a lot of companies, and GitLab is one of the big ones, they've decided to make Friday community days. So it's not a weekend. It's like the day where you give back to your community and they empower people to like engage with nonprofits or local communities around them and then share that with the group. And they could, if more companies were joining that, completely transform how we think about our Fridays. And then maybe our babies, our children will be born in a world where the 7 days is cut in work, community work, and then weekends. And same for Monday. So on the article I shared, I was playing with this idea that we all experience the Sunday blues. Like it's almost common. Like we have this like really like hard feeling in our belly, and on Sunday we feel very anxious. And it's a reality that we never addressed before. On Monday morning, we ask you to show up like nothing happened, like you were here the day before. It's not true. You were on a weekend, you were completely disconnected. Maybe you went away, maybe you had a good weekend, maybe you had a bad weekend. And so my idea was that Monday could be a day where you kind of reset with your team, with your company, with your colleagues, with your friend. And I was sharing some example, like it could be the day where actually you come, but you do yoga together, or you do a morning flow, you go through like what happened in your life over the weekend, because we know very much it was all about your life and not your work. And how do we incorporate into the work that is going to happen maybe on a Tuesday? And so really, as you say, being intentional about those days will redefine how we even think about our week. And that's, again, for me, that's where we see the trend happening, is that people are starting to learn the discipline of programming their week. Instead of allowing Zoom calls every day, they'd be like, oh no, on Wednesday I'm in the office, so I won't have any Zoom calls, so I will take them on a Thursday. And on Monday, you know what, it's my day where I do my morning flow with my team, and my morning flow incorporates a lot of different details. And on Friday, I'll do my community work, and I report back on how I feel about it or the impact of it. So people are starting to do it for themselves. The idea is that companies need to learn that and need to see that or influence that. And so the data that we've seen is very much consistent, like Mondays and Fridays are empty, and company can decide to bear the burden of it, because the reality is, as you say, like you are helping property owners. A lot of our clients are not property owners, they're tenants. And for them, it was okay to have the burden of like having a day that is empty, because they were never making revenue outside of out of their offices. It's very different from a co-working providers or property owners. We never plan to make revenues. We just feel bugged that the office is not used, but it's on us to redesign how we use it throughout the week and then do different things. You could do a yoga on a Monday, or you could decide that Friday you sublease your space to local communities or to schools, something that I've seen happening at Stripe and other companies. So it's really, it's really trying to like not fit the old model that we used to have into the office, but whereas like, okay, going on with the change and following the trends.
And Alejandra, on your side of things, I mean, Nellie, it's a fascinating way of looking at it, because actually really stepping into the mindset of the users, if you like. It's quite a sort of tech way of looking at things. How, I mean, Alejandra, you talked about, you know, bringing in walls, bringing in different pieces of furniture and what have you. From the designer's perspective, there's obviously bringing in modular furniture and saying, hey, it's here to use. How can you use this design to actually change behaviors as well? Because I think with all things, we've got to be careful not to let the pendulum swing too far one way. We've had a generation or an era of employer dominance, right? And that has, for all intents and purposes, come to an end for one reason or another. I think if we go all the way over to the other side, there's going to be a risk of it just going way too far. And you know, what I'd like to know is, how can we use design and data as a landlord, as an employer, as a service provider to our users or to our staff? How can we use design to really start changing behaviors which help both parties, which make the individual have more personal agency and be more productive, and in turn benefit the company? Because at that point where you can align those two things, life's going to get better for everyone. The company performs better, they have a lower attrition rate, the individual, the employee feels happier, they have more personal agency, they have more choice. But there's kind of, maybe I guess it's back to what you say, it's more of a principle than a policy. How do we use design and modular in particular to solve this problem?
Well, I believe actually that design has the power to influence our emotions. You know, when you come into a space, it really does make you feel some way, you know, like it affects every single one of your senses. So using design to impact behavior, it's a really amazing tool. So if you want, for example, a very energetic space, you're going to bring in more colors, more textures. You're going to bring in also other kind of cues, sensorial cues like music, or like a coffee shop where you can smell the coffee. All of these cues will impact how people behave. So for example, if you want to have a space that feels very intimate, you have to close it off a little bit visually, maybe not even just privacy, but just visually, and also have spaces that where you can sit with different types of comfort, maybe a lounge, a sofa, different types of like warm textures that are inviting, and people will behave a certain way depending on what they're seeing and how other people are behaving in the space. So I think that's one way to do things. You can definitely use design to influence how people want to behave in your one space, but I think one of the main things that we should focus on is what we were saying before, no? Like, what is that strategy? Because even if you come in and you have that beautiful design space and it's not being used as it should be, it's not really working. So it's about using design, yes, for the physical state, but it's also about using a strategy that is going to be setting the pace of how people will behave in terms of like where they work, when they work, and making sure that when they do come into the office, they're going to have what they need, right? And just making sure that those spaces are really well thought of to create a certain activity or a certain behavior. And that's why I'm always talking about introducing all these different environments, because it's important to have all these different places to work from. So, yeah.
Brilliant. I want to recap it just a little bit to come through this. So we've kind of talked here about, you know, we know the workplace is flexible, but actually what we've really got into here is actually the mindset of the users, right? The people that are using that stuff. And I think the one thing that I've really taken from this is the phrase you used earlier, Nellie, is that intentionality, is that people are coming to the workplace with a set of tasks that they wish to complete, and they want to do it in a certain way. And we've talked about how the modular way of design, it gives us that transformability within the space. I think with both of your technologies, if you like, with the room.com platform and with Density, you've got the modular furniture and you've got the data. And I think just to round this up, like let's just look forward now. We've kind of been down memory lane and we've talked about today. How are we going to use this data and this furniture to actually scale up a solution? Because, you know, we've got a lot of people on here at the moment who are all probably facing similar issues to the rest of us, which is how do we organizationally plan amongst all of this? How can we get this done where it's sellable internally? Because I think that's the final wall that we all come up against. There's the philosophy, there's the science, there's the stories of other companies that have had success, but it's the internal sell within many organizations where this falls down, where people are scared to get over the top. So how do we use your guys' technology to really to sell this to the leadership and to get this done? How can we be brave and speculate on this?
Well, for modular architecture, I think it's pretty simple, right? Like the idea of flexibility is what we're all looking for. So if you can, if leaders can understand what flexibility brings, it brings so much value. First of all, it's a lot less carbon footprint. So we're actually helping the environment, which is amazing. But besides that is the fact that you can morph that office to fit your needs always, you know, and you can just change that space over and over again. So I think the value of modular architecture is it's starting to be, we're just pioneering this type of modular architecture or prefab in offices. It wasn't made before, right? So we are introducing a new concept and people are having sometimes a hard time to understand it. But once you've had a few of these components in your office, you understand the value of this flexibility. The fact that you can have one layout today and a completely different layout tomorrow, it's an incredible benefit, right? So I think modular architecture brings the privacy you need, brings the enclosed spaces you need. It also helps us room dividers, as space, the limiting, you know, components. And it also brings you that forever eternal flexibility, which I think is great.
So there's a degree you've got to see it to believe it. I mean, and I can speak from personal experience, you know, we installed 2 room booths into our office. And actually there's 2 things we've noticed. One, our meeting rooms are like way empty now, because whereas we had people going in to kind of do some focus work or take a phone call and all the rest of it and block out meeting rooms, they go into a room booth now, they get on the phone, they start up a conversation, and then hey ho, 2 hours later they're still in there because they flipped open the laptop and they decided to do some emails there, and it was just a nice, calm, peaceful place. But interestingly, actually, there is a way to see it and believe it, because Nellie, you've got the data that can show that to others, right? And that can share that data and can show how meeting room occupation has dropped down here, and how So how are you using data to help your clients like in-sell more dramatic, more radical, more speculative strategies?
I love that question, because that goes back to a point I was saying earlier, is that it's not on companies, on employers to flex their muscle of flexibility. And so we always use data, especially to design a new space. We would call it programming, and you have architectures walking on the floor a few days a week and then coming up with some observational studies that will define how we're going to design the next space or redesign that space if we want to renovate. We were using it already, but it was like very little, very limited in time and also in purpose. And the company was good with it. We're like, okay, you showed us why you're doing it, and we see the result. Where we need to flex our muscle of flexibility is that we're going to reiterate almost on a very like constant basis. And so we cannot just walk the floor every day. It's not accurate enough. So that's the point of having live and accurate data that are like almost always on, which density is the top leader for that, like that are private. You can never identify that is John, Mary, Christoph, or anyone else walking the floor. It's a person. And already identifying that it's a person and not something else was a huge breakthrough in technology, because before that, the technology was not able to differentiate between a head or a plate. So someone walking with a plate, we think it's two people. So the technology has advanced tremendously, but now it's to like flex people's mind in understanding like, oh, how do I use data to make longer term plan, as you say? Like I have almost like minute or hourly data. How do I make a plan over the next 5 years? And that comes from principles. So the principles are like, we want more diverse talent. We want to retain our talent for longer. We want to have to be more sustainable. And those principles will define what should be the shape and the location of them. The data will back up whether your assumptions are right. And then going into the design with modular furniture really allows you to flex that muscle. And there's a Q&A, a question in the Q&A that is key, is like, how do I do it with a limited staff on site to flip a space? That is the problem. This is why head of real estate, head of workplace are burning out, because now they have to handle not just designing and planning the strategy, they need to like educate managers, and they need to organize offsite, and they need to create culture. It cannot just fall on their shoulders. Like non-leaders need to argument that they need more partners internally to cover those areas that no one covered before. And so with more partners, you have more staff that will allow you to flip your space more frequently, as is the purpose here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an excellent point. And again, you're diving into the data, but you're actually having to go into that data and ask some very specific questions, as opposed to just looking broad brush at saying, okay, there was 50 people in this room at any given time. It's actually really, and I guess we do this already in digital marketing and other areas like that. We really try and seek to understand the journey of the customer and how they're moving through that space, and how that changes during the day. We've got some more questions coming in. I think we are coming up to the end of this session. So let's get this opened up some Q&A. So Ambrose is back with another great question. You have a mic, a stage, and a room full of 3,000 ego-driven C-suite executives that are hesitant to adopt a flexible work model. What would be your message to those leaders? I think I'm going to jump in and deal with this one first. A true leader knows how to show humility, and I think if we're asking questions about how do we battle with old school thinking in terms of leadership, I think we're doing a lot in the workplace space to really understand users, but we also need to do a lot more to understand leaders as well. And I think, Ambrose, one of the things that I was talking about before is actually what I found is when you talk to workplace leaders, when you and myself in real estate as well, Actually, it's understanding what's aggravating them. And I can tell you for free, most C-level executives that I speak to are aggravated by the fact that they have a Monday and a Friday that's empty. You speak to them on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, they're pretty happy because they're around people, they're busy, they're interacting with people. So I think if you can start asking questions to leaders and say, what is it specifically that is making you try to revert back to an old school way working model, and start addressing that, and then using some of the solutions that Alejandra and Nellie have talked about in how to just change the narrative on what a working week should look like and what an office should look like. So that is the question that I would ask 3,000 C-suite executives. Not is why does people working from home bother you? And it is always going to bother certain people, but what specifically about it is bothering you? Because when you hear a lot of executives get on squawk buses, and myself is included in here, my greatest fear is actually, I look back at my own personal experience and I felt that by osmosis, I learned a lot by being in a room with lots of people and lots of noise going on. But most leaders that you'll speak to will say that selfishly, it's actually more issues of control, issues of wanting, they're going to be in 5 days a week, so they want to have everyone else around them in there. And so I think if we start getting way more clinical about how we address their issues, then we're going to be able to start to bridge that big gap that people have. But I think it's a great question. We've got a question from Larissa here. Do you have any good concrete examples of office redesign that has been successful, where people are actually coming in, using the space and are happy about it? I'll open this up to either of you. I'm sure you've got plenty of examples.
I mean, yes, we have worked with a lot of clients in helping readapt their spaces. Like I said before, everybody's kind of testing things as they go. The offices in the US are not back yet. I keep seeing this number fluctuate between 30 and 40% back return to work. So it is not completely, tested yet. But, one of the things I do see is that the most successful offices are the ones that are providing enough privacy spaces as well. Because I think one of the things that's been, that is like I said before, when my office is full from Tuesday to Thursday, everybody's in a phone booth and we don't have enough, there's not enough private spaces for people to connect in virtual meetings. So I think the most successful cases that we've seen is the people who have converted their open spaces to common areas and then added a lot of privacy spaces.
I think I share in that as well. So we have a number of multi-let offices in central London, and it's a very different scene for me. If I'm going around and looking at some of these buildings, I'll walk up the staircase and you'll go past certain floors and they feel empty, and then you walk past other floors and they feel buzzy. And it's really interesting. And when I've gone in, the common denominator I'm finding as examples of where a change of workplace design is working is exactly what you just said, which is the instinct is now is just to open everything up so it can be as flexible as it possibly can. But that does come at the expense of privacy. And that's what you were mentioning before. And what I've found is people, especially younger people coming in from the work from home setting, they're very happy to come into a buzzy atmosphere with lots of people there and have social. But there are certain tasks that they no longer find acceptable to do out in the open. So for example, when I was a youngster and I started in offices, everyone walked around on phones and talk, and we didn't have many privacy screens or cubicles in the UK between us. And so I grew up in a workplace culture where it was perfectly comfortable for you to just talk on the phone and in front of lots and lots of people. Now ask a 23-year-old, 24-year-old that only really got started working in 2019, 2020 and has spent a lot of time. They don't want to make phone calls in front of their peers and contemporaries, and certainly not in front of their bosses. So I think examples of where office redesign has worked is that perfect balance between community and privacy on the floor plate. And I think a lot of people that have tried to adapt their office design post-pandemic have gone way too much to the community side of things, and it's come at the expense of privacy. And I think one of the big issues with privacy is it costs a lot of money to design privacy into a floor plate, or it did, because you were building walls, you were hanging glass and what have you. And I think that's where modular furniture has been certainly for us, we found it interesting because we've been able to put in these room booths in certain formats and been like, do you know what? It doesn't work there, move it over there, let's see how that works and what have you. So I think the examples of where office redesign has worked is where inbuilt in the DNA of the design is a trial and error approach, which is you can get data, you can see when people are sticking and when they're not, and if they're not, you can move the furniture around the floor, and it's basically like a big game of Tetris.
I think I want to piggyback, Zach, on what you were saying about community, because that answered the question from Larissa, is that one of the best examples I've seen, and Zach, you must be more familiar than other in this room, was going to the floor of the Hoxton. So the Hoxton is like this very hipster hotel chain, and they now have co-working space inside their hotels. And it was so busy, like never before. And I was coming from visiting 2 or 3 different companies in London that were empty. And I was like, that's so surprising. Like, people need to pay to be at the Hoxton, and they're here, and all the spaces are free for the employees, and they're not coming. And what I asked the leaders at the Hoxton, like, what was the strategy? And the strategy was about building community and being a member. And that's also the 2 elements that made WeWork so successful. Yeah. People were subscribing to a culture. People were subscribing to being part of a community, and they felt a responsibility to that community. Somehow, companies who are failing at this, and this is probably what I would say to a room full of leaders, like, do you want to build a winning company? Because a winning company comes with a culture, not just work. If it's just about work, it might work, but you should look at example in the Web3 and crypto communities where people are interchangeables, and that's working for their model. But in a company where you're asking for loyalty and retention, because we know, and this is why we need also to use social studies, not architectural trends, that the social studies show that when people are loyal, when they have opportunities for development, they will stick around and they will give their best self. So if you want that, rather than interchangeable individuals, then you have to create a community and a mentorship club. And the Hoxton was very much one of the best examples. I've heard they open in Chicago, a co-working floor. So for anyone in that region, you should take a look at it, and you'll be fascinated by how busy it is.
Guys, we've done an hour and it's flown by. You've been amazing. For everyone watching, thank you very much. If you want to find out more, Alejandra at room.com and Nellie at Density, you can see they love talking about this. So DM them on LinkedIn, email them. I'm sure we'll be circulating contact details. Again, if you're in the UK and you want to talk to someone that's been talking to a lot of organizations and that has actually used this trial and error approach and used this technology to great effect, please feel free to get into contact. And on that, I will say until next time. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Zach.
Thank you so much, Zach. Thank you, Nellie. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Ciao, guys.